Hi, my name is Pieter Vandekerckhove, and today I am interviewing Dr. Christophe Van Neste. He's a dear friend of mine. I really enjoyed the interview. I hope you will as well. Christophe's interests are cancer and its development, specifically related to the embryonal cancer neuroblastoma, and he also is interested in the development of the sympathetic neuronal system. His focus lies on replicative stress and secondary DNA structures such as G quadruplexes and how that impacts development or cancer stem cell maintenance. His interests are any kind of omics data he's interested in and the integration of such data, network analysis and text mining. But as you will see, we will go into great detail about the methods that Christophe is using. He's going to explain more about machine learning. We will also talk about the difference between machine learning, artificial intelligence, deep neural networks, and other very buzzing words now today in the health innovation field. Christophe has been a great person to interview. He really goes in depth in some of these technicalities of DNA research and machine learning, which most of us probably would never have heard about, but he really tried to at least explain it in a clear way. And I really enjoyed to talk to him about this, so I hope you will as well. Christophe, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Peter, for inviting me.
So, Christophe, I know you quite well. We've been friends for quite a while. How would you describe your background to other people?
So I did a PhD in forensics, investigating forensic DNA profiles with a new DNA sequencing equipment. After that PhD, I pursued a career in neuroblastoma research, investigating this pediatric cancer. And currently, I'm doing a postdoc at the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia, working on text mining and machine learning on medical data sets.
You're not only a bioengineer by background, but also a philosopher. How do you see yourself, as a philosopher or engineer or a combination of both?
I see myself as an engineer-philosopher, so as a combination. Philosophy is the beginning and the end of the things that we try to do. It's where do you find purpose? What should you do in your life? What should you research?
How did you come to move from bioengineering to philosophy?
So I was first studying bioengineering for 5 years, and at the end of that I still didn't really know where I wanted to go in my life, in my career, professional career. And I was just genuinely interested in philosophy, so I wanted to dedicate a few years of my life to studying the beginning of how our human civilization started to build up scientific knowledge.
You mentioned scientific knowledge, and you have a strong interest also in epistemology. How did you how would you describe your research in that field?
So what I currently try to do with the text mining is finding contradictory statements within the medical scientific literature output. So the scientific knowledge is growing not because of one person, one scientist helping everything to advance, but by the community of scientists doing many different experiments, having many different views and hypotheses of how the biology is working and responsible for different aspects of disease or normal biological functioning. So you get different statements about how something works in biology, and I try to extract all statements about a specific functionality related to specifically genes, and if we can find contradictory statements for all the different genes, and if we can then have a broader picture on how the puzzle pieces fit together.
You actually went to start out from the University of Ghent of the philosophy, but then you decided to actually study philosophy abroad in Ca' Foscari in Venice, where we both studied together. Is that because you also wanted to explore that epistemological aspect more, or why did you want to stay in Italy?
So why did I go from Ghent to Venice? There's different reasons. One is, of course, the weather, which is more agreeable in Venice than it is in Ghent in Belgium. The other one was also the climate of the philosophical debates. In Belgium, it's a very non-religious country by now, but in the philosophy departments, there's still a lot of focus on religious debates, let's say. But the professors there are kind of preaching to the choir. Whereas in Venice, there was a more interesting mix between people believing in a certain religion and people having a more atheistic or agnostic outlook on the world. And so the debate that I hear going on there in the classes was much more alive. So now I'm also living in the Mecca region, where there's also a lot of Muslim believers. So that aspect, it has nothing to do with the science that I'm doing, but I find it culturally interesting.
So to linger a little bit on that point, because a lot of people might be very surprised to know that you are now living and working in Saudi Arabia and King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. What's your experience there? Is there a lively debate going on, just like in Venice?
What do you mean with a... Well, philosophically, not, of course. But the science, they have the awareness that you need to have critical scientists to go ahead with science. So we're not being inhibited in any way to pursue the science that we need to do. And we're getting to have this kind of cultural exchanges, seeing how the life is there. So yeah, I don't have any complaints about working there.
We might get back to that later on when we're discussing your specific projects. But we were talking about the start of your career as a engineer philosopher and your interest in also in epistemology, and you also worked on that for your master thesis in Ca' Foscari. It was an important topic for you. What was so interesting for you about epistemology?
So I studied evolutionary epistemology, which tries to build up a theory on how knowledge can grow, making an analogy with how species get adapted to their environment. So personally, at a fundamental level, I'm a radical skeptic. I don't believe in absolute knowledge about anything, but clearly we're all living in this world that we're sharing, and we're all living in a way that seems to indicate that we have certain things that we believe in. Like in gravity, there's few people really disagreeing on that, for example. So how does this kind of knowledge get established, and how does it grow in our minds and the minds that we share? And so I believe that this evolutionary approach just makes a lot of sense to that. It also helps you understand how things like fake news get spread, because our minds are not built to be fully rational. Again, there's not an absolute foundation for knowledge, and also how our brain are constructed doesn't seem to really, work without fault. So it creates opportunities for this kind of memes to spread and fake news and things like this. And having this kind of foundation for how we build up knowledge then helped me kind of just starting my scientific career. Even if there's not like an absolute source of knowledge, knowing that it can build up over time, and I can help in getting it to get to a highest point as is possible.
You mentioned there is no absolute type of knowledge. Similar claims have been made by Ghent professors like Professor Diederik Batens, emeritus professor now. Have you been influenced a lot by this way of contextual epistemology?
Of course, all the professors that you have during your career, they have an influence on you. So he was definitely an inspiration to come to this kind of contextual setting in which knowledge can start to grow up to a certain point. It might also diminish, giving a certain context. Again, referring to fake news, that's kind of a process that starts a way in how the knowledge is diminishing because of how our brains are hardwired.
So you are you were trained as an engineer philosopher. And with your interested in evolutionary epistemology, how did you then start with your career in towards more genetics and bioengineering applications?
So after I studied the philosophy in Italy, I had to go back to Belgium and just find a job because I was just basically 10 years a regular student. You cannot keep doing that forever. The state is not going to support you forever locally. So I was just looking for a job, and I found this position in bioinformatics, which uses programming to analyze biological data. So I could just apply for this position, and I was selected to start that program. And I was lucky because it was analyzing these forensic DNA profiles. So at this point, it didn't involve having to know a lot about the underlying biology. Forensic DNA profiles, it's more like a barcode that we all have that kind of identifies us. There's only limited biological functionality related to this. So I started processing the biological data and the genomic data. And then slowly I also worked on projects that had more to do with cancer, for example. So I had one project working on renal cancer. And then after the 4 years of the PhD, I felt a bigger hunger for this kind of biological puzzles and working on that. And I felt already equipped with the bioinformatics skill set and the programming skills to start working on more biological problems. So then I started my research on neuroblastoma, the pediatric cancer.
Mm-hmm. And now you're actually working in a very specific, with more advanced software applications, like text mining. What is text mining?
Text mining is basically only a necessity because of the very unstructured way in which scientists communicate amongst each other. So when a scientist does his research and he gets to some findings that are considered to be novel and interesting to share with the scientific colleagues, he will make a publication. He or she will make a publication. And then, but this is just natural language being used in the text that they write down. They don't annotate it with metadata to indicate, for example, now I am speaking about a gene, now I'm speaking about its protein product, or now I'm speaking about a chemical that we can use about a drug. That's all not included there. Certain gene names are the same as certain English words like hand, which can be a gene. It can also just be a hand that is being studied in anatomy. So there's a lot of kind of ambiguities there, and a lot of knowledge is out there, but it's not annotated. So we need to process all these texts and try to annotate it first computationally and together with manual curators, and then make connections between different kind of topics, like between genes and drugs, which drugs have been associated with certain genes. Do they have an impact on that, and all this kind of thing. So this is why you start with text mining and doing natural language processing. All those papers are written in the natural language, and the computer is processing all those texts and trying to extract relevant terms. So these can be those genes or chemicals or disease names, and finding associations and statements about those entities.
Your interest in cancer, that's not really a coincidence, or you had some personal accidents also happening. What happened in your environment that made you more interested?
When I started the neuroblastoma research, during these initial year, more or less, a family member got breast cancer, and I also had to be genetically screened if I had the gene that caused this mutation. In the same time, also a colleague got breast cancer, and she was working together with me on some genes within neuroblastoma that are associated with the BRCA genes, the BRCA genes that are very relevant for breast cancer. So then I was very interested also in this broader topic of researching cancer, because you get like a very personal motivation to advance the work in this.
I still remember you were also looking at the story then from the family member of a patient, and you were trying to dig into the evidence and trying to find the relevant information, but that wasn't so easy for you. Could you also tell a bit more about that?
So I had to look it up for myself also. So before I got genetically screened, so I didn't know at the time that I didn't have the mutation. I could have it, I could not have it. I only knew that my grandmother, in all likelihood, had the mutation. So that gave me 1 out of 4 chance of also having this gene that really doubles your chance of, in my case, getting prostate cancer. So then you already start doing research, looking up what does this gene do, what's the relevancy. Is there maybe another way of knowing that you have that gene, except for doing an actual genetic screening? Might there be other characteristics that are associated with this? So at a point like this, you become a kind of a conspiration theorist. So when things happen, political things, people, when they're conspirationalists, they seek all kind of associations that might or might not be true. But when people get diagnosed with something, or they are afraid that they have something, same process starts up. You're trying to look to understand it, to see connections, and you start seeing all kinds of connections, because again, that's how our brain is hardwired. It tries to look for patterns. But how then do you know that the findings that you think you have found, that they really belong together, and you're not just seeing coincidences? So again, this creates a need to do a more systematic study of all the knowledge that is out there. But one person cannot read the whole of medical literature that is out there. It's already more than 25 million papers. Nobody can read that even in their lifetime. So you need to be assisted by computers to extract all findings that might bear relevance for a certain understanding of biology, and getting summarized results on that and seeing how there are connections. Because if you're just reading as one person, you start seeing connections everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Just to examine that a little bit further, there are multiple technologies now, or applications of software that are introduced to analyze medical data. Currently in the field of e-health, there are a lot of trends and a lot of hot topics circling around: big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks. all this data could help to analyze all these software applications could help to analyze the DNA or the genomic data to solve that problem. What is your understanding of these different concepts, and which ones are most relevant for us to understand this discussion around genome or healthcare with genome?
So this is a very broad issue, and I can maybe reflect back to when I knew that I should be genetically screened because there was a 1 out of 4 chance that I might have this gene. At this point, I still had to wait because physicians, they don't want to scare the whole family at the same time. And there's also a cost just for checking one gene. If it has one specific mutation, there's quite a cost associated with it, and there's a large backlog in these medical genetic centers to process all this data. So they will do it step by step, and they will first investigate the more close family members step by step. Because, for example, if they screen my father and he doesn't have it, there was no point in screening me or my brother. So you have to wait a long time before you then know, I could have had this gene and then eventually I don't have it. So during this time, I was thinking about just taking it in my own hands and trying to get my own genome sequence, which is already possible. Anyone can already do it. And there's several companies out there. There's different ways in which you can do it. You can still do like something like 23andMe, which has a lot of kind of probes. So they don't sequence you, but they look if you have like very specific variants within your DNA.
So wait, so that's already, I'm just going to interrupt you there, because that's already very different from what we understand of what a genomic analysis is. So one of my friends did it. He just sent out some part of his saliva. Then what I understand from the website is that they run my saliva, they analyze my DNA within my saliva, and then they send me the results back. That's not exactly what you're describing that they're doing.
Well, I was skipping a step. Yeah, you always have to send some saliva, some biological material, and usually it's saliva. But the method in which they analyze that can be different. Either they have a lot of probes, and they then see if you have any of those kind of markers, and they can like use up to 100,000 probes, maybe all small different parts in the genome to get just a very specific perspective on a person's genomic setting. The other option is to just sequence it, just the way that they sequenced the first human genome to get to that whole sequence of letters. They can now do that much more quickly for anybody that is interested. They can do your whole genome, which will contain a lot of segments that still most researchers today consider not to be that important as far as very specific functionality is considered, or that relevant for diseases, for example. Or you can do something that they call an exome sequencing, which will only look to those parts within the DNA that eventually gets translated into protein products. And so if you have a mutation there, one of your proteins might not be working anymore. For example, people that have sickle cell anemia, they have a mutation in their hemoglobin, so it doesn't form properly anymore. So if you do an exome sequencing, you can discover these kind of issues. So you have different possibilities there. Now, in the end, I just waited for my genetic screening, because if I was going to do the 23andMe option, it meant sending my data to a company that was affiliated into a certain extent with Google. And I don't know if I want Google to know me that intimately.
How is 23andMe related to Google?
Well, it was the CEO was the partner of somebody high up in Google. I should look up who it is exactly, but I'm quite sure about this. Now, in any case, there was a recent article in a Flemish newspaper, De Morgen, stating research being done on political preference, and the article's claim was that a lot of that is also in our genome. So if you now know that messages by these extreme right parties is being sent specifically to people with a certain preference, they might also do that by looking into your DNA. Now, I would then probably not get those kind of messages, but who knows what kind of messages they would send me. So I didn't want to do it now. Now, for my birthday, my brother gave me a package of MyHeritage, which works in the same way. And I have to send my DNA to Texas if I want to know where I originate from. And so my birthday is in March, but I still haven't done that. I'm still having a dilemma whether I want to send my saliva to the United States of Donald Trump.
So to come back to the question I asked earlier, you explained a few of the ways how people would analyze your DNA. But you didn't mention the buzzwords. So I'm guessing that on an average DNA analysis, there is no artificial intelligence, big data involved. Is that how I should understand it?
There is in the background, in the sense of all the research that is being done now already uses machine learning algorithms to get to the variants that matter.
Okay, so let's first explain then what is machine learning algorithm.
So machine learning is just when you have a lot of data associated with a certain outcome, and you want to then investigate in which parts of the data that you put into the system can you predict the outcome with. Now, if we again just use a reference like a breast cancer, you might have a group of 10,000 women, and 5,000 during their lifetime developed breast cancer and the other ones didn't. And then you have their entire genomic composition, let's say, and then you just feed that into those machines to be able to predict, well, this person will belong to the group that will likely develop breast cancer, and another person you then predict doesn't belong to this kind of a group. So basically you're looking for associations with the data that you're inputting. Now I'm giving an example of genomic data, but it can be any kind of data. It could even be the kind of messages you write in Facebook when you're doing natural language processing, or the things you like in Facebook, or anything like this. Anything that can be represented as binary data can be inputted in a computer, and if you have the labels that you're interested in the example now, whether a person developed breast cancer or not, you can then try and look up associations and correlations between that.
So that is a machine learning algorithm.
Yes, and within machine learning, you just take some precautions. You will first, like we started with 10,000 women in this example, you will maybe put apart randomly 1,000 from each group. And then you will start developing your algorithm how to process the other 8,000 data points that you have with all their genomes. You will then find the points that matter most to make these predictions, and after that you're satisfied with how you did your analysis, and that you think you should have reliable results by now. At this point only should you check within your test results if you can make those predictions that then match the class to which they belong. And if you don't, then clearly you did something wrong. So this is how machine learning analysis are generally set up. There's only one issue with it, because even though computer scientists know that they have to do it this way, and they do it this way, they keep working on their algorithms until they get a test result that is satisfactory. So it's not necessarily based on, I have a scientific hypothesis about how I should organize my algorithm to get to the correct result. It's more like I'm going to keep trying playing with parameters to get something that I can publish. So, machine learning doesn't solve everything, and you still need to be careful with how you approach such a task.
So machine learning, if I can paraphrase, is a algorithm you develop to learn how to process the data in a way that you would like it to do.
Yes, in a way that you believe is sensible.
Yeah.
So you get a certain type of data, then how should you pre-process that so that you can compare all the different data points that you have, and then what kind of intermediary layer do you use to extract the patterns that you expect to be in the input data. You might use something like a deep neural network that is now, for example, being used by Google or Facebook to recognize images or parts of images. But you can also use something like a logarithmic model, something in the middle.
So just to explain this a little bit, so you have a machine learning algorithm, and then there are other tools you use to assist with the machine learning algorithm?
Well, the machine learning, that's just the general phrase. And then it depends on how you exactly conduct that research. The machine learning is a way of working. So you will be separating your data in the training set and the test set, and sometimes even a validation set that is being used during training, not to overfit data, for example. And then you have different kind of models that the data is being pushed through and that have parameters that are being set to be able to make those predictions. And then after you've set all those parameters, then you go and look in the test data that you didn't look at earlier if you get as good predictions as you do with the data that your model is being exposed to all the time. Because during training, the model gets to see all the data, and it gets to know, like, oh, so this data belongs with this label. So you can just memorize. I mean, a person could just memorize, this unique profile belongs to that, and for each data point you see, you just have a way of remembering that, but not really finding the causal relation or the pattern that is really responsible for that. That's why it's very important to have this test data, because the data that hasn't been seen before, if you then process it through this trained model and the results look more random, then it's like, oh, we're only remembering what we know, but we're not able to predict what really causes, or we're not able to predict things that we haven't seen. Even when you're able to predict, so your model seems to be working really well on your test set, it might be that you don't really know why. The model, especially if you use something like a neural network, might be seeing the pattern.
It's the second time you've mentioned now a neural network. I think it's time also to explain or deep neural network or neural network. What is that?
Yeah, so a neural network, it means that you're using something similar to neurons. So it found inspiration in biology. So to know what this is, you kind of need to know how a neuron works. And a neuron will be activated. So it might receive signal originating from kind of different neurons. But even if there's a signal in a preceding neuron, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will transmit the signal further. Only if it reaches a certain threshold will it then advance the signal further.
Okay.
This is, very simplified how neurons work, and you just have many billions in your brain, and they're all wired together in a certain way. So when light falls on your eyes, these signals get transmitted through neurons, and then, if two neurons next to each other are black, they arrive at a certain neuron that kind of recognizes that, and at some point it will start recognizing shapes and things like this. And how the biology worked inspired computer scientists to implement similar computational networks of advancing a signal from one layer to another. This is how we then arrive at deep neural networks. There's many layers of these neurons that will pass through a signal. It will be combined, and only at a certain threshold will it be put forward to the next layer. And this way, patterns start to emerge at different layers that are being kind of analyzed.
So when humans would just read a text, in the morning you read a newspaper article, your brain would summarize the trend or the general message. On a very detailed scale, this is what you would try to imitate with a algorithm where you try to process all the data, but only at a certain level of repetition or a certain conditions are met. Then there would be a trend presented as this is the trend that is observed by the algorithm in this piece of data.
Yes, more or less. But in the end, so this is the analogy part. In the end, this is just calculations with big squares of numbers. So you can translate this whole this whole way of operation into big squares of numbers that are being processed and rotated and and calculated. So in that sense, there's not really true intelligence. It has a possibility of an infinite combination of parameters, and so when you're putting data through there, you're kind of just seeing if I just manipulate those parameters just a tiny amount, would I get a better prediction of what I'm putting in there? So that's why that mathematically speaking, the functions that decide whether input gets passed through, signal through, they need to be something that you can differentiate. Because when you can differentiate it, you can see what the impact will be of a tiny difference. And this way, you can start tweaking all those parameters, and you have as many layers as you put in there and how long those layers are, you can have 1,000, 10,000 parameters, and you're all setting them. And this way, either you will start to recognize patterns, or you might also just be remembering specific data points within this big, let's say, squares of numbers. And so then, if you're just remembering them, then you're overfitting. If your algorithm is starting to recognize the patterns, then the algorithm is understanding the data in some way. And then it still depends. Sometimes when you get the trained model, you can analyze how it has been set and understand what causes something to be recognized and what not. Sometimes you just don't know. It's a black box. Sometimes you can analyze it to know why the neural network will make certain decisions in its predictions.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you don't know anything about bioengineering or machine learning, this may sound like very intelligent or machines that are getting quite smart. And now today there are all kinds of fears about these algorithms that are really becoming intelligent. We speak of artificial intelligence. How do you look at this trend in your fields? Is it really happening? Are the algorithms becoming smart? Are they actually doing quite a good job? Or how do you look at this?
I think historically, because a lot of this started with recognizing images, and that's how we kind of see ourselves in a way. We're in the world, looking around, seeing things happening, knowing what's happening. We consider ourselves pretty intelligent for that. And now they have found a way of training these computers, and you show them a bunch of images, and they start to learn to recognize. So at first sight, this looks like pretty intelligent. But again, it's kind of, you're looking for very specific patterns within the images that then kind of give away to which class something belongs. Is it a dog or is it a cat? Now, our eyes and parts of our brains function in the same way. They also get trained to recognize these things. But that's not our intelligence for us, I think, and it's definitely not the intelligence for the machines. Again, knowing how that data is being processed. It might be that it finds the patterns that are responsible for that. Yeah, of course, if the patterns are in there, it will find it. If it's not, then it will not find it. Yeah, that's how simple it is in the end. It doesn't make it intelligent. It's just processing all these numbers. Now, for artificial intelligence, there's a different field where, we're all agents in the world. We're doing things. And now in the future, even already in the present, when you have self-driving cars, they need to be intelligent. They need to be rational agents. They need to behave in a way that we, as conscious, intelligent agents, can predict that they will behave in that way. And they need to be able to predict how we will behave. Now, as far as traffic is concerned and self-driving cars, luckily we just have all these rules. So you can program that, you can use part of that, but there's a lot of unexpected things that can also happen. And when can you predict how a person should behave? There's kind of these moral dilemmas that start to happening also, If in front of you, you're driving at 120 an hour and in front of you there's 4 people and on the lane next to you there's 1 person, should you quickly change to the other lane so you only kill 1 person? Or, should you kill the 4 that haven't been paying attention that you're arriving at 120 an hour? So how will you integrate these kind of decisions? And, it's basically there's not really a solution to these kind of dilemmas, this kind of also paradoxes. But a programmer will need to, decide how the system will behave. So at least the humans should be aware of what's going to happen in such a situation. And they will have to behave such as intelligent agents, because otherwise that would be saying that they're not predictable. So then intelligence in this setting is just being, are you predictable? Will I, as a conscious being, be able to predict, how this computerized vehicle will behave?
There are some philosophers who believe that this human development is not so safe as it seems like. So the story you told us now is that a human developer will look at this. Let's maybe not talk about a self-driving car, but let's talk about the 23andMe or any other hospital or medical application, and that at some point the algorithm is able to predict what you should do in your life to live long and to prevent illnesses. Basically, this application would know a lot about would predict how you should live a good life. Now, if what you're assuming is true, then we shouldn't fear so much this evolution, because there will always be a human controller, a human developer. But there are philosophers like Nick Bostrom who propose that there are many black balls in the urn of inventions, and one of them is a black ball, is a bad ball, and it could happen that tomorrow somebody takes that ball out of the urn, and then he will have invented this application that can radically change how healthcare will develop or how our lives will be developed, because he will have invented the smart algorithm, let's call it AI or something, that will be able to predict how we should live our lives based on our genome. Now, do you believe that this kind of hypotheses are realistic, or do you think that it will always be steered towards an ethically correct development of this technology?
I think, you cannot predict black balls in this way, of course. So, unless you're just really talking in science fiction terms. The only way that what we can judge about is seeing how the big tech companies today, how they have started to use and misuse our personal data, and how they kind of build up these monopolies and control how we're perceiving the world. And they got a lot of free time from the governments to basically do what they want. So this is the only problem is, it doesn't really matter what humans or scientists are inventing. At some point we need to decide together what can and cannot be used. Whenever there's just one individual that gets to decide on this, the other 99.999% might not really agree on how that's changing the world. And yet it is only a few individuals that are kind of shaping how our world looks now today.
Mm-hmm.
As far as medical applications, and then I guess you're hinting at personalized medicine, which you need kind of an algorithm for personalized medicine to be a game changer in this field. I don't think that that's going to change the world in a negative sense, as long as it doesn't force us. You will have, based on your genomic screening, there will be reasons why should you still have the free choice whether you should be allowed to smoke, or should this device then create a situation in which you don't have a possibility to smoke, or it sends out some brainwaves that clear out the desire for smoking. How should that work? This is a question for you, Pieter.
I'm here to host. I'm asking you questions. So I've also been thinking a lot about that, and I believe that we need to basically rediscover what it means to develop and implement technology together. So my research is about participatory design, and I think if we learn more about how we can co-develop and co-implement technology, then we may circumvent some of the critical issues that you mentioned, such as one person or one monopoly or one company being in a major part of the power, or the one major stakeholder in the discussion without the others being involved. I think participatory design can be one of the tools that we can use. So I'm wondering, that's what I'm focusing on, but you're also focusing on a lot of these issues. You've actually thought and pitched one of your startup ideas already in KAUST. But what's the problem you're most concerned with when we talk about genome applications or genome technology?
For me, the biggest issue is privacy, and how do you protect your personal data, but how do you still have a possibility of sharing the specific data from your genome that you do want to share? Of course, you can only do that if you know at least something about your genome already. So the idea I pitched was for an app called Dynasty, and where you would be learning about your own genome. So you would have your genome sequence, but you would then be learning gene by gene what's kind of happening, and whether you want to share your personal variants either with family or friends or with the scientific community at large. And you would be in total control on that. It kind of just came from how I would like to learn about my genome myself, and what application would I want to use for that. And again, I'm not currently satisfied with the options that are out there, and I'm currently not absolutely sure if I can trust all the providers that are out there.
So privacy and having control of your data, it is a huge issue today. I think we should add also, for those who are listening and who don't know, that it's not only something that is playing in genome or DNA applications. It's basically related to everything currently that's on the internet, because the major business model of services that are provided on the internet are using marketing, and they are using our data as a source of revenue. So basically, you may have the impression that you are the consumer of Google and Facebook, but actually you are part of the product. You're part of the bigger product, which is selling your data en masse to other corporations to make profit out of that. So the context is very, very important here. And because we are talking about scale, we are talking about the data or the personal data of billions of people. So it is an important issue. However, it sometimes seems like we are still focusing on this concept of privacy of 100 years ago. So how do you look at privacy today? How would you deal with this problem today and with Dynasty, for example?
I think privacy in the end, I mean, there's two aspects to it. It's like how extra or introvert do you want to be? You know, that can be very personal. The other aspect is how protected do you feel with a certain amount of your data being exposed. Now, you know, at the end of the day, for everyone, money is important, right? So, but we're also insured that we get, if we get a certain condition, we will be treated, you know, the community will look after us. So as far as being protected is concerned, now all of us, basically, we don't know if our genomes are being sequenced. What might an insurance company find there that they decide, like, well, I'm giving you a good deal, but, you know, your brother or your neighbor, well, he's going to have to pay for your good deal because I see in his genome that he's likely to die 10 years earlier than you are. So now is the moment to ask us this question. Now that nobody still knows really what deck of cards that they are, hand of cards they are being dealt, you know, do you want to be, you know, social? Do you want to share the cost, or do you want it to be individual? When you don't know, most people will tend to be, you know, let's remain social about it. But as time goes by, and then if this becomes just, you know, you have a baby born, its genome is being sequenced, you know, how will society look at that point? How will it impact us? We need to ask us these questions before it's too late. Not in the sense that too late, you know, when this has happened, it will happen.
Mm-hmm. And to come back to one of the aspects you mentioned here is cost. And one of my co-producers, colleague Frederick Tillin, he also said, look, there is very little evidence currently on the costs and the cost effectiveness of these genomic treatments. Those are very early still in the development. Who's going to pay for that, and where do you see the costs are going to be the biggest? Do you have any opinion on how will society deal with these new type of technologies? Will there be similar costs to what we have now, or will there be different costs?
First, the question, he was talking about genomic treatments as in the CAR T treatment that is quite famous now for leukemia patients. So there's a massive cost there to develop this. Whereas, you know, here we were just talking more about having the genomes being sequenced and having that information available, which can also already be medically used. So there's a different cost analysis for both cases. So I'll first address just having our genomes being sequenced. So now you can probably do that for 200 euros. You could already get enough coverage to get insightful findings. The only problem is we still don't know, if you do this en masse, how to communicate this to all the people, and also how to extract all the relevant findings there. So it's still difficult to predict what the advantage will be. And there's some clear cases where there doesn't seem to be an advantage, like being told that you'll develop a terminal illness or a very harmful condition in 20 years. Like, you're better off not knowing about those kind of things. So it's kind of a dilemma about this, just sequencing everybody and seeing what the advantage will be and the cost. Now, for the CAR-T treatment, there's a lot of leukemia patients, and they can benefit from this, but the cost is extremely high to do this specific treatment. Now, the standard of care is still good enough for most, so that's still the logical approach to do, although the personalized approach might give more, let's say, security that it could work. But it requires just a lot of know-how of going through the whole process, and so the know-how is being guarded, and the bills are being presented, which is the reason why it costs so much. And it's not something that needs to be scaled up that much, because not everybody is becoming a leukemia patient as of now. So how society needs to interact with the scientists and the companies developing these theories, these therapies, there's still a lot of work to be done there, and it's about who has the power to decide who's paying for that and who's not paying for that.
Dynasty, however, would be a direct-to-consumer kind of application, I assume very low cost. So could you maybe explain a little bit concretely about how does that work? I expect it's kind of a low-cost application, and then how does this concept of yours work with protecting the genome in that app? You had some interesting ideas about how you could do that.
In general, once you have your genome sequenced, the first question is, where do you store that? Now, do you have it just encrypted on something like Dropbox or something like this? Researchers are now also working, like Tim Berners-Lee, the person that developed the first version of the internet, of having a second generation of the internet where the data and the applications using the data are totally separated. So you can more easily ensure that you can keep data privately, and then authorize either certain applications or other people or institutes to be able to access your data, but you always remain in control. So the genomics app Dynasty where I want to work on would be something using this kind of second generation of the internet, where you already know that the genome will be secured. I mean, I'm personally not working on this low level of technology, so I need other research to go ahead before I can further develop the idea that I want to do there.
All right. When we look at the general development of these technologies, like the genome applications, I'm wondering, where do you see this is going to go in the future? What should we expect from genome technologies? Currently, there are a lot of expectations. When you read the last editorials or perspectives of New England Journal of Medicine or Science or Lancet, everybody's saying, yeah, it is promising, we should be cautious. But they're always giving some really hopeful examples of being able to use some of this technology to really start diagnosing people at an early stage. And they always mention the combination of DNA together with some promising technologies like machine learning or artificial intelligence type of technologies. Do you think that we are at this currently? Maybe first, can you describe currently at this stage, what can we expect today if we would have a genomic service both for health services and for hereditary services? And what can we expect from it in the future?
What can we expect from it today? How quickly could it be rolled out, you mean? Or
can we today, because you speak of an application that, for instance, Dynasty could, for instance, analyze your genome, give some advice on it. Is that something that we can expect when tomorrow I go to my healthcare practitioner and I present him my genome I have gotten from one of the companies? Do you think they could give me some interesting diagnosis?
Well, for that you need to go to a genetic counselor at this point. This is the tricky thing, is that everyone will have variants, disease-causing variants within their genome. Everybody has them, maybe 100 or more. They only become relevant if you have some kind of symptoms also indicating that that's actually playing out. So this is the tricky thing about it. Getting access to your genomic data, and how do you deal with that? So if you just want to kind of have a report, how should I live and what should I do, you definitely have to go to a genetic counselor, and hopefully, he'll tell you, well, based on, your present physique and condition and your genome, you look okay. Of course, you have some variants that might become problematic at some point. But I think that if you want your genome sequenced, you shouldn't do it to find out about how you will die or what diseases you will get, but out of a general interest in how you're put together, how your biology works, and learning about our human biology, how food impacts that. I guess this is a major topic. Obesity runs wild everywhere in civilized, let's say, countries. But learning about how your genomic composition is might give you clues about what food products you would, avoid better or not, and how you can deal with that. Understanding where this constant hunger that you're feeling kind of comes from. Things like this, like learning about yourself. For that, you don't really need a genetic counselor at such a point, but I think it can already help you to improve your health and take that in your own hands. But you need to then have a program that protects you against information that you don't really need initially, unless you start developing some symptoms, and that you feel there might be a genetic cause, or your general practitioner, you might go with some problems, and your genome is already sequenced, and it's like, well, let's just have a quick look that this is nothing more serious, and then you don't need to wait 3 to 6 months before you get a result back. But you can just give you this kind of app, and he can get access to your genomic data and see, like, well, no, you don't look predisposed for this kind of symptoms linked to that disease, or maybe there is a link. I will need to refer you to a genetic counselor so you can analyze this further.
Is that similar for the hereditary services? Do you present it to a genetic counselor and they can help you with that? Do you have similar expectations now? Should we have similar expectations now for the hereditary?
You mean if you already sequence your DNA, or if you...
Yeah, so if you go to a company and you ask them to give your genome, and then you would like to know more about your hereditary history, would you say, okay, just go to one of those companies you have today on the market, or should you also go to a genetic counselor to give some advice on or information about where did your ancestors come from?
So about investigating your ancestry, there's no issue in going into that, except for maybe personal feelings about where you want to come from or not want to come from. So you can already do this with these companies like MyHeritage, that I have the package still waiting for me. I haven't done it because I'm personally also, I have the dilemma about, do I want to send my saliva to Texas? But I also do I really want to know? We all come from, the same place in Africa anyway. I kind of already know that. I'm more interested in how do all the genes work in my body? How do they work together? Could I adapt my lifestyle to, enjoy the possibilities of my body more? or less.
What do you expect to happen then in the next 5 to 10 years? Are these the kind of questions we will get an answer to already, or will it take longer? It's hard to do predictions, of course, but maybe some based on what you currently see in the research area.
Well, based on what healthcare costs, and I mean, you go to a dentist and you can already pay, 100 euros for something simple, and then knowing that for 200 euros you can get access to data that for the rest of your life can be there as, supporting some decisions that you'll be making. It doesn't look like that big of a cost anymore. But I think the market of people that, I'm very biased. I'm a researcher. I'm, researching on how genes work. Of course I want to do that, for my own genome. But, somebody working anywhere else, not in science, not in biology, probably just, doesn't care unless they have a medical condition. So I guess this is a big difference. So for me, I cannot make a prediction because I'm biased and I want to know. And I hope you want to know too, whoever's listening now.
Yeah, of those 10 people left, maybe only one is interested. So if we talk about the future and if we talk about what's happening out there in the field, you've mentioned already a few times different stakeholders, different people. It seems to me, though, that healthcare is hugely fractured. It's very segmented. People don't talk to each other cross-disciplinary that often. It's starting to happen, but it's still at its infancy. You talked about genetic counselors. We talked about healthcare professionals having to give advice. You also gave me an example earlier about the fact that in your own lab, there is still a discrepancy between the developers and the biologists. So how do you see this? Is it very fragmented still, or do you see people are converging and multidisciplinary teams to work on this together? How could you maybe first describe the situation you told me as well in your own lab? That's very interesting.
So in the lab in KAUST, where I'm working now, so we're working on these text mining tools to process all this medical papers. But the people working on that, they have a computational background. They don't know anything about biology, and so when they're developing their tools, they're already they're happy when they get a certain kind of outputs, and if they have like 80% accuracy, they might be like, yeah, that's really good. But they cannot really measure the frustration that you experience while you're sifting through the results. And, when is that exactly good enough, or what results would you like to see? So in my lab, I'm one of the few people that has both a programming and a biology background now. So I try to develop something that I'm pleased with. I mean, I know my own frustrations very well, so I start processing all the papers that are out there, trying to get to the statements that I'm interested in, and evaluating whether I'm already good enough or not, and then I keep working on this kind of program until I get it right enough for myself. So this is the difficulty when in a team you only have a certain type of people working there, either computer scientists or biologists, and they're not working together. That's very problematic. But generally, since the last 4 or 5 years, there's a lot of more efforts in getting these multidisciplinary teams starting to work together. I don't know how efficient they are yet, and whether the nature of work in academia, where most of the workforce is a PhD student that has 4 years, maybe 5 years. They need to get first author papers. How that way of working makes multidisciplinary research also a little bit difficult, because you need to argue about who's going to be the first author on this paper or that paper and things like this. So although everybody knows that we should be working together, there's still political issues within academia to get it to the best way possible.
You've explored some of these options together with in your startups as well, and also in your projects. For instance, you've also worked together with you've worked together in the past already with people from multiple disciplines, but could you maybe tell a bit more about some of the projects you worked on or in your startup where you try to work together with people from different disciplines?
Well, I didn't have a startup yet. I tried to pitch a possibility to start a startup. Now the fun thing in doing that is you need to put a team together, and then you think about all the requirements. You need to actually make that happen. So you try to compose a team together that will get the job done. So this is where academia and industry also differ from each other. I think, that in industry the goal is very clear. You know where you want to end up, and you then make the team that makes that happen. Whereas in academia, you're interested in a certain research question, you don't know where you will end up, and you need to be able to publish on that. And whenever you need to have a multidisciplinary team, and you don't know where you're going to end up, you don't know what findings will bear the most weight and who will get the fruit from this labor. So this is again, then I think the problem.
This is one of the important parts that we also learn from the design literature. However, so what I mean is that it's very important to work together on something you don't know yet what is coming out of it. So it is kind of a blind collaboration. However, when you look at the current evidence, I did a systematic literature review on the current e-health that is co-designed, and there is virtually nothing yet published on how to co-design genetic applications. Now, I completely understand that genetic applications are still at its infancy, but you could argue that already at this point you should start to work together with people who think about what is the biological perspective, what is the perspective of the genetic counselor, what is the perspective of the patient, what is the perspective of the healthcare professional, how is he going to interact with that in his medical informatics portal, how will patients see this as a result in their file, how will people interact with this information. So how do you propose we should increase this co-design or collaboration between people?
Well, the first thing to increase co-design is the communication, and getting to platforms, to moments, to interact together. So I myself, participated in a hackathon, an MIT hackathon in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and I really enjoyed the process. Now, the starting point there was physicians. So physicians came with their problems as they see that for their patients, basically. So patients weren't really involved, but the physicians came, and then you had developers, tech developers, and then also legal people and economists, and everybody then kind of thinking together. And at the end of the day, we're all patients. So I guess, the patients are involved in some sense. We're all patients sooner or later. But yeah, there's also need to organize, I guess, these hackathons involving also patients and for very more specific sets of problems, because the hackathon in Riyadh was quite generally. Anybody could propose a problem and then start working on that.
To stimulate collaboration, actually, you've also started to have a completely radical open source philosophy. So you are sharing basically all your work. People can go and find your profile on GitHub. People can go and find your research on Google Scholar. Can you tell us a bit more about GitHub? Because there you have tried to at least share some interesting things already. What have you shared so far on GitHub?
So you can find my work on github.com/dicaso. So I'm radical in open source as at least when I'm working in academia, because in academia, we're furthering the knowledge that we've all built up together over centuries. And so this idea of keeping that locked up somewhere for the benefit of just a few individuals, while we're being sponsored by states and governments, just doesn't sit well with me. So at least when you're in academia, I believe you need to be open about the results that you're getting, the tools that you are making. Of course, there's kind of a trend where they want to economize universities. They want it to create jobs and create spin-offs. But for me, that's not the original mission of academia. I actually like the academia where they were discussing theological arguments in the beginning of when it all got started up. So for me, it's fundamental that it stays open and that I share my tools. Also within the context of academia, where everybody at some level is working a little bit in their island, it's sometimes difficult to advance software projects because it's difficult to really work with a big team on one project. Only kind of the big institutes that are leading some of the research in bioinformatics, for example, are able to have long-standing software implementations that are broadly used by the scientific community. So for everyone else, I think it's important that you share the work that you're doing, and this way you might start up collaborations with people that are trying to analyze data in a similar way. So for the text mining, I have a program there called Sina, named after Ibn Sina, the very important Arabic philosopher, very important for medical history also. So this tool you can just find under my Dicaso GitHub account, and if anyone else is kind of working on this text mining and wants to be able to do something similar, they can find me there and collaborate with me there.
So if people are interested on working together with you on Sina, what type of people are you looking for? What's Sina about? Maybe you can give a few things away.
So Sina is just about processing all the medical literature that you can find on PubMed and getting to the relevant statements about genes and their functions, and doing some downstream analysis on that. So people that you're looking for are developers, bioinformaticians that are trying to tackle it the same way. Also linguists that might be interested in scientific communication and how you get to specific linguistic constructs within those scientific papers that are the important ones. And then of course the biologists that are struggling to understand the research problem that they're working on and to know what's already out there, because so much research is being done over and over again because we forget about what the researchers before us was doing because it's all there lost in those texts.
So maybe to end, but what is currently on your mind, Christophe? What are the burning questions, or either in philosophy or in your research, or maybe even your private life, that you're trying to address now?
Yeah, so most of my time at academia, I'm working on this kind of tools. But I'm working on the tools because I have these research questions that I'm really fascinated about. So I'm trying to further my knowledge on how those cancers work. So the neuroblastoma, how that links to breast cancer and specific subtypes. So to do that, I need to link with gene functionalities that are mentioned specifically for those both diseases and how that interrelates. Maybe papers discussing both diseases at the same time and doing all of that automatically to get a summary out of how they are linked and differ from each other.
And can you explain it to people who are not so familiar with the topic? So why are you interested in the link between these two cancers, or is that?
Yeah, so again, it's actually a coincidence with my colleague that got breast cancer while working on a gene that is related to breast cancer in neuroblastoma. So there's just, to start with, it's quite an obvious link. But then, as I was thinking about this, why is breast cancer so prevalent? Why do those BRCA genes that create genomic instability, why do they specifically lead to breast cancer? And why more women than men? And in the end, it's because women have a monthly cycle. They have a continuous development going on every month, again and again. And neuroblastoma is a disease of a developing embryo. So it looks like a good starting point to think that this has specifically to do with development, leading to this kind of a situation. And so then you need to know what developmental genes, next to the ones that we're already interested in, are leading to this kind of a phenotype, the cancer, and specifically to the gene that we are studying. And can we put all the puzzle pieces together? Now, scientifically, I think the reason is that these genes that have to do with genomic stability, I think that when they are not fully operational, that they help, that the genomic instability helps to prolong the cell cycle. And specifically, there's a moment when cells are dividing that signals get put on there to say whether they should keep dividing or not. And because genomic instability and trying to repair DNA will shift these kind of phases, there might be more time in which the cells keeps telling himself, I'm doing a good job, I should keep going, although they have more damage, and they should think like, oh, we're already that damaged, we should just quit this. But because this kind of shifts their cycles, and they just keep going and going and going, dividing, and this is how you get a cancer. And this is how it relates to the genomic damage. Not in the first place because it's creating mutations, but because it's shifting the way that the cycle is operating. I have been watching the Chernobyl series, and the Chernobyl accident happened not just because they had extracted all the regulators within those nuclear things, but because during the day they had it working at a lower level of output, and this caused a certain poison to kind of build up. And so because of this unexpected consequence, so not initially having more radiation, but actually lowering the reactivity of that reactor, and then suddenly it explodes. And so I think something similar is happening in this kind of cancers with this kind of DNA repair genes, that the mutations that you see, that for a large part they're kind of this poison arising at the genome, but they are not the end in themselves. It's the fact that the cell cycle is kind of shifting, and the regulation of it is then kind of also changing, that causes the cells to keep dividing. And then because they're dividing more, and they are also having more mutations, at some point you get also mutations that lock them in that state, and then it just kind of explodes, and you have this very dangerous cancers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, not so great for those people, but it's really it's really nice to have a long conversation with you and to be able to explore your research area deeper. And I hope that we can talk again soon about this, and maybe you can give an update then of how this quest of the BRCA and the neuroblastomic research is going.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Christophe.
Thank you, Peter.
Also, one more last addition is, Christophe, where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you? What are the best places to get in touch with you?
Well, you can just contact me through my GitHub account. I will be happy to respond to any questions you have.
What's the GitHub account?
So github.com/dcaso.
Okay, thank you very much, Christophe.